Radar, but just for a bit of hot off the press news, we've just merged 3 organisations, which are Radar, the National Centre for Independent Living and Disability Alliance. This happened on January 1st, and we are now Disability Rights UK. We're the largest pan-disability UK organisation that is led by disabled people. If you want to talk to me about that, I hope I'll still be here at the coffee break if we stick to time. I think it's really important at a time like this that there's a strong voice for disabled people and disabled people's organisations, and also that we come together in terms of maximising impact. There aren't too many lots of little organisations around, so we're really excited about that development. But I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, as Radar, so we're still in the transition phase. We're still sort of talking about both brands. But as Radar, we launched late last year a project called Doing Careers Differently. And what this is really about is sharing expertise, unleashing potential through peer support. And what it involved, amongst other things, was enabling people to share their stories and also to hear from disabled people who had got on further in their career. So just to give one example, at one of the events that we held, we had a presentation from Stephen Lloyd, who is an MP who himself has a hearing impairment. And at the end of the event, a young guy who was deaf and a British Sign Language user approached Stephen Lloyd and started to talk with him about wanting himself to become an MP. Now, I know that not all disabled people want to become MPs, it's a very particular case, but we also have people talking about, well, I work in banking, and what does that mean, and how do my adjustments get made, and how am I progressing in my career, which other, perhaps younger disabled people can hear from. So this is very powerful, and it happens online as well as face-to-face. Some of the sorts of things that people said were, kind of giving tips to each other. Think through some scenarios and solutions, show you're a problem solver, not a problem creator. So go to an interview. Anticipate that that an employer may not have ever employed someone who's blind before, let's say. Go and say, well, this is the technology I have, and this is how it will work. Just show that it's going to be fairly straightforward. Never give up on your dreams, but be flexible about how to, when you're aiming for them. Never be afraid to ask someone to be a mentor. They're usually flattered. We've certainly had a lot of experience of that in these networks that we're developing. And even your disability can help you stand out from the crowd. Use it. So don't be too apologetic. We work with people, for example, with major speech impairments, or people of very restricted growth, more than mine, who are grappling with how do you make a good first impression when people just kind of don't know where to look. And actually people can learn from each other. How do you manage other people's expectations and the impact you have? Through this we're kind of learning from success, and it's slightly turning the narrative on its head. We're very used to a narrative in disability about the barriers that people face. How do we overcome these barriers, the impairments we face, the disadvantages we face, and so on. I should say, by the way, I've had mental health conditions, so I have sort of used the word we loosely, although obviously people have very different experiences. And we're starting to talk about what the experience of disability can actually mean you bring. For some people it means you've done a huge amount of problem solving, you've managed your own personal assistant, you've dealt with all the kind of access issues that you've had to overcome. For some people, some types of impairments, it may mean you've got more empathy. It may mean, for example, people with some mental health issues have a lot of creativity if you can harness and edit it. And so it's kind of saying, what do we bring? And we've got this network called Radiate, which is a network of disabled people in senior jobs who are kind of leading this work. If anyone wants to talk to me about that, please do. It's open. If you know disabled people in senior jobs, you might be interested to get involved. They're doing really groundbreaking work. And then informing people like headhunters, this is what you need to do to actually reach us in executive search, for example, or in any kind of recruitment process, to be fair and to make sure you get those diverse shortlists. It's really, really interesting work. A year or so ago, we did some research on the experience of disabled people's careers, and it was really interesting. There was very little. There's an awful lot of work on how disabled people get into a job, kind of welfare to work mission, if you like, but incredibly little of whether people progress, what happens in your career after that. So we did the first national survey supported by Lloyd's Banking Group. We got over 1,400 responses, and we did identify a pool of senior disabled people, about 110 people earning over 80,000, maybe more. And over 100 board-level directors, and everybody had said to us, these will be people who climbed up the greasy pole and then they've become disabled. They've had an accident or they've had a heart attack or something in their 50s. But it wasn't the case, actually. Over half had had their impairment for over 20 years. So some people are progressing up hierarchies with an experience of disability, and I think we need to learn from those successes. So people said things like, I've had brittle bone disease resulting in 14 fractures, I've suffered from multiple sclerosis for 19 years. And the research also showed what made a difference to career progression. And it was mentoring and career-long senior support. It wasn't actually making the adjustments, which is interesting. You have to have adjustments to be able to work at all, but they don't necessarily enable you to progress. So people said things like it's good managers, good people who give them the confidence to achieve, probably just the same whether you're disabled or not disabled, really, in that sense. Looking beyond labels. And one woman kind of rather classically said, she applied for a job to be an HR director. She was offered the job subject to the usual processes, and including an occupational health report. But she was placed into the role before the occupational health report came through. When it did come through, it said, on no account employ this person, because they've got bipolar disorder and they wouldn't be able to do it. And she said, I filed the letter away carefully and continued in that job quite successfully for many years. So, you know, people have a lot of barriers that they have to encounter, but kind of people get through them one way or another. But we did find in that piece of work, unsurprisingly I guess, that disabled people are concentrated in low-paid jobs. Once you get to more senior jobs, non-disabled people are much more likely to be in them. And we also found, unfortunately, that disabled people were less likely to get mentoring and senior support than non-disabled people. The very things that help you with your career, disabled people seem less likely to get. And non-disabled people were twice as likely to be board-level directors, 3 times as likely to be other directors and heads of departments. And really, disabled people who are in work, many people are experiencing in-work poverty. So we've got this huge problem of disabled people being out of work, and we've got another huge problem, which is disabled people in work, but still living in poverty, or at least concentrated in the lower paid jobs. So, I've mentioned the Radiate Network. We had all sorts of kind of well-known disabled people come and talk with them. His picture of Frank Gardner, and also David Lumpkins, and Peter White, Tanya Gray Thompson, and so on. So the scale of the challenge. I think we are very used to thinking about the massive problem we face in this country of youth unemployment, and it is enormous. But I do think it's worth remembering that young disabled people are twice as likely to be not in education, employment or training as young non-disabled. And the rate of not working, being out of work for 18 to 24-year-olds, is about 62% for young disabled people. This is pretty horrendous. I don't think we're talking about this enough, actually. It seems to be it's a bit of a crisis. So what can be done? I want to talk a little bit about the review I did last year, commissioned by the government, by DWP, reported in June 2011. Worth mentioning, I think, that a lot of the focus, a lot of the attention that's been given to this review has been about Remploy, which is a very important issue with the College for Remploy today. However, there's a lot more in the review. If you've not looked at it, I would do have that if you're interested. But some of the things it found were probably unsurprisingly, disabled people, particularly young disabled people, want the chance to work in any sector, in any type of job, and to have the support that you need to take with you. A lot of people said we no longer want these separate workplaces because you're disabled. And there is an evidence base. It's grown up separately, for example, in the field of learning disability, in the field of mental health, in the field of physical rehabilitation, But the lessons are very similar, that say that it's a bit of a myth that if you have a stepping stone in some kind of sheltered workshop, that will help you get a mainstream job. Actually, the best things to help you get a mainstream job are not having those stepping stones so much as having the right support in a real work environment. So it might be going straight into paid employment, or it might be work experience, or it might be an internship, or it might be an apprenticeship. But it's about getting the support right, both for you and for the employer. And it might be quite intensive support, or it might be fluctuating support. It's about getting that support right. So, my review kind of really recommended that there should be improved support both for individuals, so they became more confident about seeking and keeping employment, and for employers. So first of all, confident, well-informed employees, ready, if you like, to take the risk of going for a job. So one example is when you go for your job, knowing that access to work would be there to support you. Suppose you're going for a job in a small business, that access to work would kick in to pay for some technology you need, perhaps some IT or some other equipment or some support, people with a learning disability or whatever. And government has gone a step towards this by having a downloadable form, but I think government could go further. And it would really help you have confidence, but also the employer, as I mentioned earlier. So confident employers ready to take the risk. What about access to work covering temps if you have a fluctuating condition where you might need time off on a, sometime? I don't know if you've employed people who have fluctuating conditions, but it is a real challenge. I personally, as an employer, people with fluctuating conditions would find it really useful to have access to work with temporary cover. And it might make employers more likely to take someone on who has had some sickness in the past, but where it's related to their impairment. Controlling your own support so that access to work becomes more empowering. And I've recommended that information should be far more widely available, rather than having a sort of rather bureaucratic system that goes and assesses you and, and tells you you need this very expensive chair or something. Why not put all the information online? Let's rate all these products and services. Let's drive down the costs. Let's have large employers could just go out and get them. Because if it's cheap, they're not going to get access to work support anyway. Individuals will be able to know more about what they need, but they'll know from how others have rated them, what others have found useful, and that sort of thing. And then actually controlling the budget if you want to, as an individual, so that you can take it with you. I mean, I had so many stories in review about people saying, well, I've always needed exactly the same thing in whatever job I have, but I moved from Southampton to Newcastle. I had to go through the whole process all over again. And actually, if I could have just been able to say this is a continuous, or maybe a little bit of extra assessment because the job's changed, but there's something, people find it very burdensome with long delays. Employers find the delays, where there are delays, very problematic. I think there have been some huge improvements in access to work, I should say, in terms of things like time delays, but it could get better. I recommended it should move from being government's best kept secret to being a recognised passport to successful employment. It's incredibly little known, particularly by people working in small and medium-sized enterprises. This matters. If this is where the growth is coming, disabled people aren't going to be able to be part of that growth if we don't promote access to work properly. And it works. For every £1 spent, the Treasury recruits £1.48. It's also very useful to prevent ill health retirement, which is something the government's very concerned about. It's all very well thinking about all those people who are on employment and support allowance now. What about turning off the tap? 300,000 people leave work every year due to ill health or disability. We can prevent some of that. And at the moment, if you're a disabled young person and you wanted to get, say, an internship, access to work won't cover it. And I have young disabled people working organisation as interns, and it's really problematic. They need a personal assistant, let's say. So they're not on an equal playing field as a young non-disabled person because they can't get the funding for that personal assistant. This is a nonsense when that small expenditure would enable people to get that all-important work experience. So we need to promote it better. I've mentioned a portal to open up knowledge, and I think that peer support can happen through local disabled people's organisations as well. They have a huge role to play. I've recommended on Remploy strong support for those businesses, factories, that are potentially viable, that could become mutuals or social enterprises or other forms of company, to move to those kind of viable enterprises, rather than subsidising the government as they are at the moment. This is very controversial. And on residential training colleges, a real sense that there's some great expertise in those colleges, but that perhaps it could be spread further through different forms of a different model of different partnerships with, for example, further education. The government hasn't responded yet to this review, and we're expecting it to respond at some point, in the probably not too distant future, but I don't know exactly when. But watch this space. Right, that's all very well. That's all about supporting disabled people. It's about the government systems like access to work. But, you know, to put it as people will always put these things on the radar, so yeah, but this is all very well, there's no jobs, you know, where are the jobs, what about the demand side? I just want to focus on youth unemployment for a minute. Youth unemployment started to rise in this country in 2005, well before the recession. So this is a structural issue. It's not just an issue about the recession, and we need to look at it in that kind of long-term way. And what seems to be happening is that very few employers employ people directly at age 16 from school, or even college leavers. You know, the figures are quite low. And more you get graduates who are in jobs where maybe you don't need to be a graduate. So others are being sort of squeezed out of those employment opportunities. But it's not, as the press would tell you, because employers find young people ill-prepared in terms of things like literacy and numeracy. Most of them find them well-prepared. That's what the evidence shows. And I'm drawing here on evidence from the UK Commission for Employment and Skills. Do look at the website. The main issue employers mention is lack of work and life experience. Now, from the employer's point of view, if they want to get best talent, they could take more responsibility to create entry points and progression routes, different entry points and progression routes. You know, there are some talented people who are leaving school at 16, who for whatever reasons have these disadvantaged, on care leaves, etc., have disabilities and so on. And there are some organisations, KPMG is one example, that are recruiting people directly from school and then training them and supporting them through further training qualifications in some cases. And I think we need to encourage employers to grow that. We also need to encourage employers to move away from word of mouth recruitment, which obviously benefits people already in those networks, and disadvantages a lot of other people not. And very importantly, we need high quality work experience and internships. And there was by high quality, I suppose I mean avoiding things like a case that was in the Guardian a week or so ago about somebody who was already doing fantastic voluntary sector, voluntary work, and was made, allegedly, to move away from that, to go and stack shelves for no pay for a profit-making company. And, you know, is that actually what you want? You want to make sure that these work experiences are likely to give people the skills and experiences to get paid employment. We want a system that's flexible enough, and perhaps sometimes longer. You know, these 2-week work experiences with school children, you know, lots of small employers have got the time to do it. We need to rethink work experience, I think. But I think providers of work services can encourage employers to be imaginative of work experience. And we need to think about how people progress. It's very difficult to progress because, you know, the structure of the economy is such that you've got a lot of entry-level jobs and you've got fewer in the middle, and then you've got professional and higher-level jobs. How do you move from the entry level? Not everybody is going to be able to move up. But at the least, you can enable people to have more autonomy, to try new things, to expand their roles, to make the job in some sense fulfilling and developmental. Okay, what might this mean for providers and government? I think that providers of the work programme, work choice, subcontractors and so on, can support individuals through peer support and evidence-based approaches, what I was saying, but not so much stepping stones, but support. And support employers to recruit and develop talented young people, disabled people, and others facing disadvantage, and not to over-rely on qualifications. Government could align its policies around apprenticeships, the benefits system, social care, health, and I'm still hearing people I know being discouraged from employment by some people in the health sector and social services. I mean, you know, these are anecdotes, I'm not saying it's universal, but I don't think everything is yet quite in line, although we've been moving perhaps slightly in the right direction. I do think we've got to stop stigmatising people who receive benefits as if everybody's a scrounger. It really does not help people's morale, it doesn't help employers' confidence. It's the one thing that makes the members of my organisation more angry and despairing than anything else. So if there's anything anyone in this room can do, I know the National Union of Journalists put something out asking journalists not to do it, which was extremely helpful. Government has set up a cross-government ministerial group on employment and disability, which I'm hoping will do some of this aligning. And finally, I think that's it. Just a few other things that we offer at Radar/Disability Rights UK. We do some work around wellbeing, written and developed by people with personal experience of disability, how you support and improve your own wellbeing. I mentioned leadership. We run leadership programs, which have had some tremendously good results, and I've just put a few website addresses up there, including the definition of apprenticeships.
Thank you very much indeed, Liz. We'll take just a couple of questions now for Liz, and then we'll move on to Julian. Anyone got any questions? If you have, please state your name and the organisation you're from. Anyone at the back? I'll just ask one, Liz. I mean, it's a quite a broad question. It's about, you mentioned the importance of getting employers more involved in sort of incentivising them to open up their recruitment procedures to young people and disabled people. But, you know, particularly in this time when the average employer is if they do advertise apart from word of mouth, get inundated with applicants. They do then face a very quick process, or some process of trying to filter through those quite quickly. They're bound to sort of take shortcuts by going to qualifications and things like that. How do you start to change that mindset, to get them to think more widely about being a good recruit?
I think it's a really interesting and important question. I think the first thing is that employers do want talent, and employers are concerned about productivity. They're concerned to get, you know, the people who are going to serve them best. And I know this isn't the best economic moment to be perhaps inviting them to cast the net wider. But I think it's interesting that an organisation like KPMG decides to recruit people earlier. And, you know, you wonder, I've got no idea, and I don't know if there's anyone here from KPMG here, but is it partly about companies wanting to reach people earlier, talented people earlier, before they get to be graduates? You know, there's a competition for good graduates. How do you compete for the best talent? So is there something about, you could be missing out on good talent. And we've got examples, you know, of people who've started out as market traders and become chief executives. I know that that's not going to be the case for everybody, but there are talented people that companies could be missing. I think the other thing is, I don't think it's any good government deciding what these incentives should be and saying, go forth employers, here's why you should do it. I think it has to come from employers, really, and employers influencing each other. And I think there are some employers who want to do that. I'm involved in the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, and there are companies like John Lewis and BAE Systems and all sorts of others that are trying to work out how you do encourage that kind of influence, because some of them are engaged in doing it and they find it beneficial.